Hello and welcome to Genealogy Quick Start. We often have think about our research in the same way all the time, right? Because we're in a rush, we get a new name, we want to jump on Ancestry, we just want to throw names into boxes and see what comes up. Well, today we have two new, well, one's kind of new, one's a little updated, one's the dating game. Dates are always important and we need to think about them deeply. But we have a special guest here today. He has his own show, Genealogy Adventures. I don't know if you guys know Brian Sheffy, but he has a pretty interesting way of thinking about researching for the enslaved. And today he's going to do a quick start called Researching the Path of Enslavement. And of course, Jim and Michael are going to do the dating game record style. They're going to dissect the dates, all those dates, because they can really help you with different things, different clues that we might easily overlook in different types of records than they did the last time. So let me bring on my buddies, Jim and Michael. First up, what's his name? Say his name. Columnist and editor, Jim BEIDLER. How are you, Jim? Next up, genealogy tip of the day, often a featured speaker, Michael John NEILL. You know what? We haven't said that in a while. We haven't called you a featured speaker in a while.
Well, I've been called worse things, so that's not too bad. So it's okay. It's okay. It's all good.
So, guys, I think what Brian is doing today is really, really interesting. So when you think of African American research, it's all about enslavement. But when you think about European research, researching for European ancestors, it's all about jumping the pond. So do you guys use kind of Brian's techniques by thinking about paths? Are there specific paths that are general paths that people would use with why they would come to America?
Oh, absolutely. And of course, it depends in part as far as what time era you're looking at. With my beloved Germans in the 1700s, some came by themselves and were indentured. Others came as part of families. In the 1800s, many came to circumvent marriage restrictions, where if they didn't have property, they couldn't legally get married, or to avoid the draft.
Yeah, those are lots of different reasons. Michael, did your guys have I'm sure they had some of the similar. Are there any other?
A lot of it was similar reasons. Economic opportunity was it for a lot of people as well. For most of mine, it really wasn't religion. It was usually money and the things that Jim mentioned. Religion might have been a small part of it, but usually it boils down to money and opportunity for most people. And at what age were they when they emigrated? Sometimes that makes a difference. Children are being drug along with their parents. Young single adults, it's economic opportunities, probably going where they know somebody. Young families, and then sometimes if grandma and grandma emigrated. I've got several individuals that remained in my Germans where I have better documentation. Their kids had all left, and the joke is when the last one jumped the pond, grandma said, well, I'm going to be here alone or go somewhere with all these Yahoo children I spawned. So she gets on the boat with sometimes it is the last immigrant child she comes with, or he comes with, depending upon the situation.
I did not realize that grandma was the holdout. I didn't know they had to drag her across, leave her alone.
She might have been hoping one or two stayed, and then all those uppity upstart she births, they all said we're leaving, and the last one she said, well, it's that I live with my sister-in-law, so here we go. You just don't know.
You don't know.
These are Michael's money grubbing Austrasians and Thuringians.
If memory serves, you have a Thuringian too from the same village as mine, so you got to kind of be careful there.
Well, I didn't know about grandma, but you know what? Our viewers know what they are supposed to do, which is let us know where you are And if you are a member of a genealogy group, you must represent and let us know. So let's see who we have here. We have Judy. Judy has been number one for quite some time from Chicagoland. It must be how they do it in Chicago. She's from the Chicago Genealogical Society. We have Dean Henry, a special guest alum from AAGG in Philly, as well as Family Quest Society, OGS in Philly. Marion, let's see, is here. Hey, Tom. Tom didn't know if he would make it. Drive carefully, Tom. Pay attention. We have Lori. Hey, Lori, how are you from Wisconsin? Hi, Terry from Columbus, Ohio. You know, I had one of the best OGS conferences I've ever had in Columbus, Ohio. What I liked about Columbus is everywhere you went, they had homemade potato chips. Like they didn't like open up some bag. They had homemade potato chips. Oh, Emma. Hey, Emma. I have a crush on Tom's daughter, Emma. It is so nice to see you, see your name today, Emma. Hey, Jean from Collegeville in PA. Jean is a genealogy junkie. She's OGS in Philly, OGS in Greater Virginia. Is that AAGG in Philly, South Carolina? You showing off, Jean, because every time you got some new groups, you are the number one genealogy group fan. Terry Burks, yes, Terry. My number one fans for my newsletter, if you're not on my newsletter, please join, is the AAGHCSC, which is the Chicago African American group. They are like hundreds of them. Open my email all the time. I'm so excited. And yes, Family Search Tom says, yes, we need to rep the family search as well. Thank you, thank you, thank you. So you guys ready? They got us all revved up. That was our engines for us to get ready for this wonderful quick start, which is, let's see what it is. The dating game record style. So Jim used to be like Mr. Dating Game guy, and it's been a while. Are you sure that it hasn't, you still have the muster for this?
That's something we're not talking about in this.
If we're not talking about dating and online social, what are we talking about with this dating game record style?
We're talking about how most records don't have just one date in them. They have more than one, which you might confuse for which date is which, or whether a date of recording that may not matter so much is the one you're thinking as the date of the actual act that it happened. And we'll give you some examples to make this all clear what this is all about.
All right. I love it. So let's step into this dating game. Darn it, I thought you guys are going to help me out, but okay. I love genealogy.
That's a whole different show.
That's another episode. All right, let's do step one of the dating game. Step one is to transcribe your document. So that takes a lot of work, and why am I actually transcribing, and how do you transcribe your document?
Well, I think transcribing serves several purposes, but one purpose is it forces us to look at all parts of the document. Oftentimes, if we find something and we're excited about it, we scan it really quickly looking for some smoking gun, some big revelation, and we focus on that, and we're off and running if we're not careful. But if we take time to transcribe it, we're less likely to jump to incorrect conclusions, and we're also more likely to notice everything about the document, because we may think something doesn't have many clues, or it has one really big clue, but there may be other clues that are more subtle, kind of hidden, if you will, that when we think about them can be more important than the obvious thing we noticed originally.
All right, so we're transcribing that document, and I talked about how I like to transcribe now. Before I was typing. Typing is like so last decade, right? Voice typing is fantastic. You can read your document, like use Google Docs to do a transcription. Of course, you have to go back and clean it up, but yeah. That might be easier.
You're going to have to do a show on that, because for a lot of things I have with the spelling errors and all that, I think it's going to be fast. If you're a decent touch typist, I think it's going to be faster to type it.
All right. That's just me. I'm thinking it
depends on how legible and how spelled correctly and those kinds of things, it is.
I
I would
think
think
you just challenged me. Are we going to have a challenge? We're going to
we
get us a
might have to.
document. We're going to do an old school. We're going to do a new school.
We're going to get you a Virginia land patent from 1680, and we're going to see how that goes.
All right, we'll do it. We'll do it. There's pros and cons to both.
That's true. You're right. That's very true.
All right, so that's step 1, transcribe your document. I love that step. Step 2 is to find all the dates in the document. So, you want to talk about that?
Well, one thing is that they you might think, well, yeah, it's going to be obvious what the dates are. Well, they might be spelled out. I mean, literally spelled out in some documents, which makes it a little bit more of a challenge.
Very true. Very true.
And make certain you understand the intent and the purpose of each date in the document. Some, as Jim alluded to earlier, are just legal formalities that don't really tell us a whole lot, to be honest with you. Others, there may be some, acknowledgments and things of that type indicate people were not dead on that date if they're acknowledging something. And whether that's a big clue depends on
not being dead is a huge clue.
Not being dead is a huge clue. Yeah, and it's but some are just legal pro forma that don't really. We want to know what they mean, but they're not huge revelations typically.
Okay, so you want to just find them all first.
Right.
Don't try to make any judgments. Find them all. And so then step 3 is to analyze all the dates. And you guys have like a few documents. Did you guys want to look at that now?
Yeah, I think that's a good idea.
All right, let's get some documents in here. And what is it that we have here?
Well, this is a burial record, a church burial record from the city of Reading, Pennsylvania. And these are burials from 1862 from the Lutheran Church. And the second one there is of Peter Mayers, gives his birth date. That's one date. And gives the month and year of his marriage in 1847, March 1847. And then, of course, since it's a burial, it gives his death date, November 30th, 1862. Says that he's 55 years, 10 months, and 4 days, which matches the birth. That doesn't always happen.
Yeah.
And then a non-date thing for honorable mention is it gives his birthplace in Kingdom of Bavaria, actually in the Western Palatinate, which is this was for client work I did, and allowed me to find then several generations back in Germany for him.
Okay, really cool. I think I just moved down to the bottom.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you can see all these are fairly complicated, and over on the left hand side is where it gives the actual burial date, and this last one here, the 31st of the month. So it's interestingly that's kind of the one that's most difficult to see. You see the others in the narrative.
It's the most important one.
There's a question, and I've got a question. There's a question from Judy about it looks like Charles Evans on the left-hand side. Do you know what the purpose of that is?
Well, that's the cemetery named after a guy named Charles Evans.
Gotcha. Okay.
Charles Evans Cemetery. That was like the first garden cemetery in Reading, and kind of the place to be buried.
And then does that mean there were 126 funerals in 1862 at the bottom on the right?
I think so.
And wow. I'm always about the money. I wonder what the $175.25 is.
I mean, that was probably the honoraria paid to the pastor, because I'm not sure
for all. Yeah, that would sound right for all of those. You know what I mean? They kept track of all of those. Yeah,
buck and a half.
Yeah.
All right. Yeah. What do we have here?
This is another burial record. This is of a direct line ancestor of mine, and it says that he was died on the 25th of July. His name was Johann Philipp Machmer. And then he was buried the next day on the 26th at the age of 52 years.
Wow,
3
they
months
didn't take
and
no
10 days.
time.
No, they often did. This was in the 1700s. And the thing that's distinctive here about, I mean, you have two dates, 25th, 26th July, but then that age check gives you, if you do the subtraction, will give you what his birth date supposedly is, and where he was born. The baptismal records haven't survived from back that early.
Oh,
So
wow.
this is the only record you have of his birth date or his approximate birth
This
date.
inferred date. This is
Inferred
fantastic.
date, exactly.
Yes.
When you
Exactly.
put that in your database, a person, when it's calculated like that, you want to indicate that it was calculated. This is not advice for Jim. This is advice for the audience. You want to indicate that it was calculated, and then this is your source for that, because
Yeah.
sometimes those, it's assumed the person who calculated the age had the birthday. I would guess probably from a Bible or someplace, but who knows? Sometimes those calculations are incorrect if their math skills
Sure.
off. But
Sure.
you want to indicate where you got that from, and then it was
Yes.
a calculated date.
Yeah, because you don't know that calculated date is correct.
Exactly.
Exactly. And you can always go back. I hate when I can't remember where I got it from. All right, we have a pension cover, pension record. Oops, did I go too fast?
That's okay. Yeah, this is of John Kramer, not my ancestor, but a son of my ancestor who was trying to impersonate his father to gain a War of 1812 pension. And this goes over like this has like 20 years worth of dates in this long and detailed pension file.
Wow.
Yeah. Now, it would have seemed to me that the fact that the son, admits he was born 1807 and the war was over 1815. And he wasn't claiming to be a drummer boy. He was claiming it. Well, yeah. And what really ticked me off and through this long and involved pension file is that it poisoned me being able to apply to the War of 1812 Society on this line. Yeah.
Man.
I found another one.
This reminds me of those sites when you go to like shop for wine, Jim. I'm sure you know what I'm talking about. And they ask you for Mr. Wine Club, and they ask you are you over 18? Like, what idiot would, even kids would know to say, of course I'm over 18. But obviously, John here, he couldn't get it together with his dates.
No, and it took forever. Yeah.
What's going on with Troutman?
Oh, here, Johannes Troutman. This is one of the estate documents, and in it says that he died 5 years ago. So roughly 1764. Yeah, about 5 years ago. And this, in the case like this where there isn't an extant church record, this is about the best recording of his death that you're going to get.
That's why in the 1700s, you have to pull every single thing that you can, because you're not necessarily going to get that, key source that you want.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And it's important to remember in a document like this, when it's an estate record, they don't care about, sometimes people don't understand this. The court doesn't care about the exact date of death. They want to make sure the fact the person is dead matters, who their heirs are matters, but whether they died, especially since it's been several years, they don't care if it was March or April of that year. They've been dead that long. And one thing I don't know in this case if this relevant or not, but sometimes they'll wait to settle an estate until all the heirs have reached the age of majority, because it's simpler from a legal standpoint. It's simpler to go through that process if you have no minor heirs. That might not be
So
why they
that's
waited
why
years.
sometimes you see the estate stays open for so long because they're waiting for them to get to the age of majority.
Right. It's without going into that whole lecture. It's the legal process is easier and cheaper if you wait till the kids have aged out. And are all
Or they may wait till the widow dies who had
That's
widow's rights, and then instead of doing one probate and then another probate, you just do the whole shebang at once.
exactly. If they're dawdling to settle the estate, there's usually a legal. It's like Jim said, they're waiting for the widow to pass, or there's minor grandkids or something that are heirs that they're waiting to reach out, age out of their
Okay.
guardianship time period.
You guys are so smart. What do we have here? Who's David Newman? I love
David
military
Newman
records.
is an uncle of mine. This is also a pension type thing. He was, when he applied for a pension at some point in the process in 1912, they wanted to document his service. So this letter was written from the Bureau of Pensions on November 16th of 1912. They're asking the Bureau of Pensions to document his service. Not the Bureau of Pensions is asking the military to document his service. And so what's in red is the date it was sent, in blue is the date that it was stamped as being returned. The Adjutant General is signing off that this man was in this unit, and then there's some information about him as well. But that's just what's going on there. In the
So
next
hold on, can
document,
we just talk for a second about these pension packets and all of these dates? Like on every single sheet of paper, there's like 10 dates.
some
And
of them,
so
well, sometimes there's 10, and sometimes there's not
four.
quite that many, but there are several dates, and sometimes, like on the one we saw there's the date that it was received by the Bureau of the Pension Office. There may be, because they would send forms out to people. This was a form sent to the Adjutant General's office. They would send forms to the pensioner, maybe forms to a records clerk, as we'll see in one of the other examples. And
But the question, Michael, is do you need all those dates? Like how do you know which of all these dates you need?
the dates on that document for him, I'm going to be honest, you don't need.
Okay.
I mean, you understand what they are. That was the date they requested it. The other date they received it. They really don't. I hate to say don't matter, because there'll be some purists that will say every date matters, but it really doesn't. In this case, it really doesn't matter. You want to know what they mean so that you can say that's not a big deal. There's
Like I
dates on
try to, for the pension, I try to do for each act. Like if they file for multiple acts, when they filed for it, when they got it.
Right. And you want to think of, if it says, this document doesn't say, but usually their application will say the act under which they filed. And then what you should do is you can go on Google Books, or there's other sites you can go on to get a copy of the act under which they filed, and that may tell you something about their service, or how long they had to serve, how long they had to be married if it was the widow applying, and things like that. So you want to look at the act under which they applied. You also want to remember, when you see the date of the act, that's not the date they applied. That's the date of the act under which they were applying. And sometimes people get those dates mixed up. This was from a pension. This is a copy of a death certificate that was in a pension file documenting that the veteran had died. There are 3 dates that I've underlined here. The first date in red, and what this is a certified copy of his death certificate. This is not his original death certificate. It's a certified copy. He died March 27th, 1893, 7 p.m. If you need that much detail, that was what was in the record. Then the rest of it is a transcription of what was in his death certificate. There's a date that the death certificate was returned to the county clerk. I think that's probably on the next screen. That's the date that's in blue. So he died, February, I think it was. In June, it was the record was filed at the courthouse. There was some gap there. And in a lot of states, when records were in the earlier days of being kept, there might be a gap in terms of how long it took to get it filed. This type of gap is not unusual. Doctors didn't, the minute somebody died, run to the courthouse and file it. There'd be a gap there. But then on 11th of July, 1893, was the date that this certified copy was made out to be sent to the pension office. So what really could have happened here is we see June was the date month it was filed. July was the date this was sent to the pension office. They could have said, you got to prove he's dead. You ain't got no death certificate. Doctor, turn that blankety blank thing in because we can't send a certified transcription of it until it's been filed.
Okay, let's see. Do we have anything else? Michael, what is up with that sound? Is that, I think it's you. Let's see. Here
To me,
we
it sounds
are.
like it's you, but I'm
It
not.
sounds like it's me. I'm going to mute while you talk.
We'll see if it fixes it. Maybe it's not. Anyway, I'm going to try to muddle through. This is a copy of a land warrant that was in a widow's pension file. There's the act under which he got the certificate, November session of 1781. In December of 1782, Dominic got a certificate, and then this copy was made in October of, I think it's 1841, that was in his Revolutionary War pension application.
Okay, lots and lots of dates there, and you have to decide based off of whatever it is you're doing, which dates you choose. And that's just a closer view. And I think that is it for you guys' documents. So let's see what your other steps were. So that was step 3, which was analyze. Step 4 is are there any gaps? So you guys talked about different gaps and why there might be there. And then step 5 is to document and repeat, which we just did. So I'm going to go through all the steps, and I'm fast at this sound. So for the dating game record style, you want to transcribe your documents. Then you want to find all the dates in the document. Step 3 is to analyze the dates. Step 4, are there any gaps? Step 5 is to document and repeat. Guys, thank you so much for that, and we will see you soon. Dun, 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 dun. Bye, Jim. I hate to leave. I hate to say goodbye. Hello, give me 1 second. See, I knew it was Michael. Give me 1 second to get ready for our second half. Okay, welcome back to our second half. We have another producer of a live show with us tonight, and he is going to do something very interesting. I'm really excited to hear from him today, and I see Jim's ankles. That's really funny. And so let's go ahead and welcome on our special guest from Genealogy Adventures Live, Brian Sheffy. I got your name right. Hello,
You
Brian.
did. Hi. Hello, Shamel. It's so lovely. Thank you for having me. It's really lovely to be here.
And so, Brian, we have to, haze you like we haze all of our special guests. And we have to ask you, what is your genealogy story? When did you get started? And how did you know that you were hooked?
I was a fairly late bloomer. I didn't get into genealogy until I was about 32, maybe 33. And it was a birthday present for my dad. He was turning 78. Phoned me mom. She was like, do not buy that man anything. He's got more than enough stuff to last him 10 lifetimes. So I asked her if he might like his genealogy done. His parents divorced when he was really young. And I thought giving him the gift of his Sheffy ancestry would be meaningful to him. And it was. And in the process of doing his family tree, I just got hooked. The fact that I went back as far as I did, and thankfully no mistakes on his particular line. That was it. It was like Sudoku. I love challenges. I love puzzles, and genealogy is nothing but challenges and puzzles.
So you are definitely always excited and enjoying yourself. I can tell, Brian.
Absolutely.
So, Brian, I am so excited for your quick start today because, the show is all about my doing this for my guests, but I learned so much from my special guests. And so, your quick start today is called Researching the Paths of Enslavement. So, can you explain what this means?
Yes. This is nothing new. I'm going to preface that. I'm going to front load our conversation
It
with
feels
that.
new to me, Brian.
This is nothing new. It's how Black people in this country have had to research their ancestry. What I've done is I've slapped a kind of clever little phrase, pathways of enslavement, and given people tools to using critical thinking to ask themselves between 6 to 8 questions to be able to research their enslaved ancestors. And basically, this has come from well over 2 decades of researching my own enslaved ancestors. And one, I learned there was only really a finite number of ways that our ancestors were enslaved by any given enslaver. And 2 different kinds of enslavement. Most of my actually all of my direct enslaved ancestry involves people being passed down generations of the same family. They were never sold away. Their kids, their grandkids, down to their 6 times great grandkids in one family were never sold. They were always kept with that family. So that's one type of enslavement experience. And the other one, sadly and obviously, is when families got split apart, they got sold apart, taken here, there, and everywhere. But basically, these 6 to 8 questions, no matter whether it was kept within the same family or that latter part being split apart and sold here, there, and everywhere, still boils down to 6 to 8 questions that we can ask to think about where we can find the records to answer those questions.
Fantastic. So let's get going with the quick start because we have a lot of documents. I'm always trying to narrow them down, but when you have great documents, I just have to show them.
Okay.
So step 1 for researching the paths of enslavement is to identify the enslaving family. So,
it is indeed.
This is not an easy step, but can you just kind of help us get here for those of us who might not have identified that enslaver or who have but need other tips on other ways to do it?
Okay, so I'll give you I'll give you a real world working example, and it's based on a woman called Suki. So I found a client's ancestor. Her name is Suki. I found her in 1870, and she was in Georgetown County, South Carolina. And I quickly realized that she was enslaved, that she had been enslaved by Thomas Parker. And I achieved that because 1, she was living on land that was owned by him, even though he wasn't living on the land himself. Looking at land deeds told me whose land she was living on. 2, she had a labor contract with him. And those freedmen labor contracts, which are both on Ancestry but are also freely available on Family Search, if you're not using them to figure out who was the last enslaver of your family, you're missing out on a trick. And I will say that freedmen labor contracts weren't always used, and they weren't always available in all of the states. But that's
Right.
that's a whole other show and a whole other quick start. So I found this woman called Suki. I wanted to know how she had come to be enslaved by Thomas Parker. So the first question was she born in his house?
Hold on. So you're about to go into the steps, Brian. So how do they, if they don't know the enslaver, you're saying they know the enslaver for this step? Okay. So what are, you said the Freedmen's Bureau is one great place to look. What's another great place to look to maybe identify the enslaver?
One really easy thing to do, 1870 census, look at whose land they're living on. And if your enslaved, now freedman ancestor is enumerated without a property value, chances are they didn't own the land. And I can't remember if the 1870 census asked if you rented or owned. But if there's no value next to that person's name, they were not a landowner. Gotcha. I scroll up till I get to the first white family, and sometimes you need to go to the previous page or sometimes 2 previous pages because some families were large-scale enslavers who still had a lot of Black people living on their land in the 1870s. But you get that first white family, and then you start digging into them, whether that's probate records, their parents' estate records, or other things. Did the enslaved family have the same last name as that enslaver? And that's not to infer any kind of biological connection.
Right.
But always look at who they're living near.
Proximity. I
Who's
love that.
proximity, and it's like the fan network. But you're looking at who they're living near, how long they're living near those people, and then once you have that, you start looking at that, the white family, the landowners, to see if they were enslavers, and then you start looking, did they use freedmen labor contracts? Did they have slave sales deeds, both buying and selling? You just really start digging into those records, looking for your ancestor's name.
Fantastic. So I think I heard you say Freedmen's Bureau, you said probate record, you said proximity on 1870. So we now have identified the enslaving family. And so we're going to move on to step 2, which is to ask, how did the family acquire them?
Right. So if this, and again, this really fits very nicely with the dating game, because dates, years of birth, even though they were approximated, can be really, really important. So let's just say question 1 kind of asks if Suki was born in Thomas Parker's household. If she was older than Thomas Parker, then she clearly wasn't, because she was older and he was younger, so she couldn't retroactively become born in his household.
Right.
But we'll come back to that one in a second.
Okay.
If he didn't begin to own land and be taxed on enslaved people until he was, let's say, in his 30s, and Suki was documented as being around 35 years old, then she couldn't have been born in his household. And he was probably still living with his parents. This is where critical thinking is really important about all of this. Paying careful attention to an enslaved person's age and their documented enslaver's age at a given point in their enslavement will help you figure out if an enslaved person may have been born in that person's household. I don't know if I can move on to question 2.
Sure. You mean step number 3, of course. So search for inheritance records, you say.
No, so because there's a couple of little steps in between there.
Oh, okay.
So because Suki was older than Tom, she came to be with him in one of 2 ways. Either she was born in one of his parents, in his parents' household, or he purchased her externally.
Yes.
So if she was, the way that you actually solve that question, see, every research question should lead you to a specific set of records to start to research.
Okay.
So you would have to look at both his mother, you would have to look at his, probably his father's estate. I just say mother because everyone should remember women own slaves too. Okay. And just because a woman married didn't mean that her enslaved people became her husband's property. He could manage them, and more than likely her husband would manage her enslaved people. She was still their legal owner. Okay. So you have to always research both parents. So looking at his father's deeds, paperwork, who he was buying enslaved people from, that's one way. Or he would have purchased her from outside of the family. So either from someone that he knew in the community. So again, that's a county level of records. Or he bought her from someone that was outside of his community and outside of his family, which may be a slave trader.
Ah, okay. So inheritance, deed to deed, person to person within the county, and then slave trader.
And when researching an enslaver's mother, you also want to try to find something called a dowry deed.
I was going to ask you about the dower. So, okay. And how will the dowers help?
The dowers will actually say, because mothers could give their enslaved people to their daughters when they married, as well as the daughter's the woman's father also giving her enslaved people. They will name them, on this date, in this county, in this place, as part of her dowry, separate from whatever property her husband may own. I give and bequeath to my daughter, Sarah Lee, the following enslaved people. Robin.
And so that would be a part of what you're saying. Step 3 is search the inheritance records.
Mm-hmm.
And so where do you find inheritance records?
Those will 9 times out of 10, maybe probably 10 times out of 10, be in county probate books. Now, different counties did things in different ways. Different states did things in different ways when it comes to probate and probate matters. So you have to research that as well. And there's different ways that different places they file dowry deeds. Sometimes they're filed with property deeds. Sometimes they're filed with sales deeds. Kind of have to do your homework. Others are they're called court records.
Okay.
So like accounting state account records you can find there, but you can also find dowry deeds. If you get stuck trying to find out where your county or the county that you're researching in file their dowry deeds, shoot them an email.
Yes, and they'll know exactly which collection to look in.
Yeah, they'll tell you.
I love that. Okay, so let's see. That's step 3 is search inheritance records. Step 4 is, you said, search for property sales deeds. So inheritance, we kind of looked at those. So where are we looking for property sales deeds?
Again, property deeds would be in a separate set of books. Those are like land deed records. But there's another little mini step that kind of got missed out there. There's another little scenario to kind of go through. So Suki was born in 1805, a little different scenario. Thomas is still born in the 1840s. His parents were born in the 1820s. She's born in 1805. Again, dates matter. So Suki is older than Thomas and his parents. So you need to go back another generation. So in that scenario, I wouldn't have even looked at his parents, estate records, land records, property records, deeds. There's no point, because Suki, there was no way in heck that Suki could have been born in Thomas's parents, because she's older than them. Yes. You would have to look at their parents. So now you have 4 people that you have to look at instead of just 2, someone's parents. But you do the same process. You look in the same, look at the court records, dowry records, all that kind of stuff.
Wow, you just gave us like an amazing kind of time management tip, right? Because based off of Suki's age, I would have spent a lot of time looking through all the deeds for him and for his parents. I would have never thought to go back to his grandparents because of the age. That is, if it was inheritance, right? And so there's another little deed. So there's a dowry deed. Now, she could have, the female enslaver, or even the male enslaver, her husband, could have received enslaved people in the document that's called a deed of gift. I'm still not sure I'm not sure if there was a tax dodge for back in the day. It's like, instead of paying tax on them when I die, I'm just going to give them to you while I'm alive. Then they're yours. Everyone knows what they've got. Everything is kind of good. Works very much the same way as a dowry deed. The names of the enslaved people will be spelled out. Sometimes you get family relationships that are spelled out. Family relationships are priceless, and even more priceless, you may even get an age. Yes. Oh, love the ages. So Brian, I want to be able to show all your records. And so are we on step 4? You did the mini step 3C. We're on 4. And so step 4, that was all the inheritance stuff, right? And so now we're going to move on to a property sales deed. So these are just like looking at land records. This is
no, not that kind of property. It's just that our ancestors were property. But you're on the right track. So we have now run the gamut on, if all of the answers to each one of these questions is no, you've run out of steam on researching the Parkers in terms of being part of Suki's origin story. She came into them from some kind of way. So now you have to start looking outside the family. So the
Okay.
next obvious question was she purchased from another enslaver? Um, I'm going to say in the upper-ish part of the South, so Virginia, North Carolina, South Carolina. I'm going to say that from my experience, both client research and my own family history, those enslavers were purchasing enslaved people either from families that they knew really well and they trusted, or
Okay.
they were still, even if they didn't particularly know them or like them, they were still part of the community. It could be a sheriff's sale, it could be a sheriff's auction that they were buying from, or it could just be a private business transaction. It's like, oh, we heard that the Jones were having a bit of financial trouble, and for Black people, we knew what that meant. Someone's getting sold.
Yes.
And
Oh.
it's like, well, his enslaved people have a good reputation, and we're really busy here. I can use a couple of extra people, so he'll just toddle on down and go to the auction. There will be a listing, because again, let's put it this way: if it's an auction from an estate sale and enslaved people are being sold to settle a debt, again, you will find those in county court books, court record books. Those will be there. In terms of, well, even a sheriff's sale, there was still an accounting. There was always accounting. This is always, this country's DNA is British. The British are huge administrators. We've been administrators in this country from day one.
Yeah.
So again, there will be a record. It will be the list of names, hopefully ages. You may even get entire families that are being sold, but you get the name, the age, and then the person who purchased them. So you would be looking for Thomas Parker's name.
Okay.
The last the last kind of part of this, which is it's the most dreaded of all of them, is if Thomas Parker bought Suki from a slave trader.
Okay.
And I say that is the worst because a lot of their records don't survive, or they're held in private hands. These are like 1 or 2 man operations. Sometimes, you get like the big ones in Charleston, like Middleton, the Middleton families and sell slavers and whatnot. Those kind of records those records still exist. But if you're talking about a 1 or 2 man operation, those papers are really, really hard to find if they've even survived at all. So as I said, that's the trickier one. You would have to research all of the slave traders that were active in your county. That's newspapers.com or Chronicling America or wherever kind of old newspapers are available, and doing your research that way.
All right, let's look at some of these records, Brian. So we have exactly like a little less than 10 minutes. And so if you could just talk us through kind of what some of these records are.
This is the last page of a freedman labor contract. This was done in Charleston, South Carolina. If you are, and by the way, for anyone who's got South Carolina ancestry from the West Coast, from the East Coast, and we're talking Georgetown County down to Berkeley, kind of around there, those records still exist. Because a lot of this is an important one, especially for people doing enslaved research. You have to research the culture of enslavement where your people were enslaved.
Because everywhere is different.
Everywhere is different. South Carolina is perfect. So where my mother's ancestry is, which is called the 96th district, that's Edgefield, Abbeville, all around, all kind of.
Yeah.
Oh, well, we're probably related then. The enslavers tended to live in the same land where they enslaved people. They didn't live elsewhere. Whereas people on the East Coast, they primarily a lot of them lived in Charleston. They had massive plantations and multiple plantations all over the place, like I said, from Georgetown to Berkeley. But that's not where they were living. They were living in Charleston. So Charleston was where they were filing their papers. And that's where you have to look.
Very interesting.
Yeah. If you're from Edgefield, you go to the Edgefield County Courthouse. That's probably where your ancestor put their papers. But if you're researching in Georgetown County, South Carolina, you have to go to Charleston.
Okay. What's this here, Brian?
This is a deed. This is a sales deed. I've been researching a mother and a daughter called Nancy and Flavia, and thank God she had a daughter called Flavia, because
That's a
trying to
cool
find a
name.
it's a cool name, but trying to find a Nancy amongst the Gullah Geechee in South Carolina would have been on her own would have been a nightmare. So this is actually showing a sales deed involving Nancy and Flavia, mother and daughter, between Alan H. Bellin and Margaret Flagg, who was the sister. And this is part of their story. Going back even further, this is the 1851 estate inventory of Mrs. Esther Bellin. She's the mother of Allard and Margaret. And whose names do we see there? Nancy and Flavia. They're together. This, going back even further, was a bill of sale of Negro slaves. This is in this full citation that you see on your screen. You should always do this so that so that you know where you get records from, and any other researcher knows where you get it from. Is amazing. And doing this, I found Nancy all the way back in a really old, here we go, in a really old deed of sales. She was a 9-year-old girl.
Wow.
And she was sold by Elias Octavius Ball of Charleston, and she was sold to the Bellin family.
Are these the Balls, like Slaves in the Family Balls?
That is exactly it. This is not, I can't remember his name. Oh, he's going to shoot me.
You're in trouble because I can't remember. His name just slipped me too.
Edward Ball.
Yes.
Sorry, my apologies,
Sorry,
Edward. I apologize. This is not his ancestor, but Elias is part of Edward's extended Ball family.
Got you. Oh my gosh.
And just asking a series of questions led me to specific record groups that allowed me to research both Nancy and Flavia, taking Nancy all the way back.
Look at your flow. Let's look at your flow. Sorry to do this. This is really awful. I can't believe I'm doing this, but I am.
So that's just a graphical depiction of what I've just been through, and those are the questions.
So just can kind of like walk us through again.
So it's finding your enslaved ancestor, figuring out at that point in time. So typically for us, it starts with the 1870 census. Taking a look around who was living around, who we knew was a formerly enslaved ancestor, to figure out who their enslaver was. Then you start looking at the ages of your enslaved ancestor in relation to their last enslaver. If they're younger than their last enslaver, then there's a pretty good probability they were born in that person's household. If they were older, that's where things get interesting, and you start digging into the enslaver's parents, possibly their grandparents. And then if you run out of steam, if their name, like Nancy's name, was just not popping up at a certain point amongst the Bellins, I knew that they bought her from someone else. So I knew I had to go look for sales deeds, looking for Mrs. Bellin's name, the Bellin name, to figure out who had sold Nancy to them. And that's how I found Elias. I mean, I'm making that sound really, really easy. That was about a day and a half's worth of work. Just I just asked some questions and just looked at some documents and stuff. But yeah, getting from the Bellins to Elias Ball, that took about a day and a half.
I love this. This is a great flow. It is a fantastic way to think about this. Amazing. Have you had any time in any of this the slave trade records?
As a matter of fact, I am trying to find as I said before, I'm researching the Gullah Geechee in South Carolina, particularly those who were brought into South Carolina and sold by Captain John Bull and some of his business partners, and his grandson-in-law, Pierce Meese Butler, who's part of, his wife's family, part of the Middleton and Brailsford slave importation company. And I say that so matter of fact, it's disturbing. I say it. For your audience, please forgive me. I've been researching enslaved people for so long, and I know that I sound kind of dispassionate about it sometimes, but it
Well,
is
when you
what it is.
research, you do
It
that
is.
and you fall back into the emotion and you wipe your tears and you come back and you keep trying to find them so you can
Yeah.
tell their stories. So
But that's a
that was
long-winded way of saying I'm
Mhm.
still trying to find the Middleton Brailsford accounting books. I
Okay.
know when they sold the enslaved people. I know when they arrived. Thanks to voyages,
Yeah, slave
slavevoyages.org.
voyages.
I know the
Yeah.
names of the ships, all of that stuff. But I have yet to find those accounting books.
Okay, let's look at step 6, which is, of course, to document and credit your work. Brian was very specific about this whole crediting your work. Don't just take people's stuff and not, you know.
It's upsetting. I'm smiling and I'm kind of laughing, but it is genuinely upsetting. I've had work passed, that I've done. Other people have passed off as their work. I know other researchers who've complained about the same thing.
So yeah, don't do that, guys. Just like taking from trees. So let's go through
Yes.
all these amazing Oh, Brian is like, oh my God, I saw you. I don't take from Brian. Do not mess with Brian's tree. So let's go through researching the path of enslavement. Step 1 is to identify the enslaving family. Step 2, ask how did the family acquire them. Step 3, was it inheritance records? Search them. Step 4, search property sales deeds. Step 5, search slave trader records. I want to find more about those. Step 6, document and credit your work. And especially if it came off of Brian's tree, don't mess around with Brian, guys. Do not mess around. So, Brian, when you find these slave trader records, you're going to come back and tell us all about them, right?
I would love to. Actually, I will do my best tomorrow to send you an email with because I have found some, not for what I'm
Okay.
researching at the moment, but I every once in a while I do come across them.
Okay, you guys can hang out with Brian more. He has a show, Genealogy Adventures Live. Brian, your show comes on Sundays, right?
It does indeed. Sunday, 4 p.m. Eastern Standard Time.
And here's a full screen of Brian and his logo. So most definitely check Brian out. Brian, thank you so much for being on. Jim is definitely on his definitely. He looks like Ad Man. What's his name? Don Draper sitting there on the couch. You just need a cigarette, Jim. All right, everyone. Oh, let's see. Did we have questions? I cannot go without answering any questions. Let's see. Everyone loved it. Dean Henry has roots all over America. I don't think there's any soil that does not have the Dean's DNA. He has Middleton roots. I don't know if you know Dean Henry. Everyone, thank you so much for joining us. Take care and go find your people. Stay here, Brian.
Take care.